Hey everyone. Tonight we begin with your face pressed into mud that isn't just mud. The copper taste of blood on your tongue, and the weight of a 10-pound musket under your arm like a sleeping child. The smoke is so thick you can't see the man screaming ahead. Only remember the volley, a sound like a door slamming in your skull, and the way the line beside you folded as if the earth had swallowed it. This isn't the heroic scene they promised. It's rain pooling in the hollow of a dead man's back, flies arriving before the ambulance, and the quiet knowledge that if the bullet misses you, the dysentery won't. Tonight, we step into the life of a Civil War soldier, the hunger, the lies, the chaos, and the quiet deaths that never made it into recruiting posters. So, before you get comfortable, like and subscribe, and tell me, what time is it where you are? You're in 1863. The good news is the war might make you a hero. The bad news is you have to live long enough to see it. You are there. The air is a symphony of discordant sounds and a canvas of impenetrable smoke. The very ground beneath you shivers with the concussive force of musket fire. A continuous, ragged tearing sound that seems to rip through the fabric of the world itself. Black powder hangs heavy, thick as a shroud, stinging your eyes and coating your tongue with a bitter, acrid taste. You find yourself pressed against the damp earth, the cold seeping into your worn uniform, watching shadows writhe and fall, soldiers sprawling in the mud, their movements abruptly silenced, their forms becoming one with the churned, bloodied ground. Each crack is a destiny decided, a life extinguished, a future unwritten. It is here, in this suffocating chaos, that you witness the stark, brutal mathematics of war. You remember the stories? The heroic tales spun by recruiters, the grand speeches of generals about honor and glory, about a death that was somehow noble, wrapped in the flag. But here, in this reality, there is only the trembling anticipation, the raw, primal fear that clutches at your throat and squeezes the air from your lungs. You watch as a line of men, so neat and precise just moments ago, advances, almost in slow motion, across an open field, a vulnerable, living target. Each step they take is a testament to a courage born of desperation, a silent march toward an inevitable end. And then, the volley. Not a single shot, but a devastating chorus of crackling fire. 1,000 tiny explosions that tear through the air with unimaginable force. In that instant, the world seems to hold its breath. You don't see the individual falls. You see the line itself simply dissolve, as if the very ground opened up and swallowed them whole. The field, once filled with the rhythmic march of soldiers, becomes a scattered, broken landscape of twisted forms and still bodies. Later, you hear the number, the cold, stark statistic, a single volley, in one terrible, fleeting moment, claimed the lives of 79 men, 79 souls, all extinguished in a breath. The sheer, overwhelming scale of it settles in your gut, a heavy, cold stone. You find yourself whispering into the mud, a desperate, silent plea. Great God, when will this stop? The question hangs unanswered in the smoke-filled air. A silent prayer echoing the fear that pulses through every fiber of your being. This is not the glory promised. This is the raw, unvarnished truth of a death that finds you not heroically, but randomly, violently, indiscriminately. It is the end of everything, leaving behind only the chilling quiet that follows the storm. a quiet punctuated by the distant, fading cries of those who still cling to the fragile thread of life. You lie there, listening, waiting, feeling the weight of the 10-pound musket grow heavier in your hand. A silent, cold companion in this desolate landscape. The rain begins to fall again, a soft, relentless drizzle, washing over the living and the dead alike, blurring the lines between them, as if the sky itself weeps for the senseless loss. Beyond the immediate terror of the battlefield, a more insidious enemy lurks, an unseen predator that claims far more lives than any bullet or bayonet. You learn quickly that the soldier's greatest foe is not always the man across the field, but the microscopic organisms that thrive in the squalor of camp life. Day after day, you watch as strong men who face down musket fire without a flicker of fear, suddenly collapse. Not from a wound, but from an invisible assault. Their bodies, once robust and full of youthful energy, betray them, racked by dysentery, a relentless, agonizing purging that drains their very essence. The constant, debilitating diarrhea becomes a grim reality, a source of endless discomfort and profound weakness. Then there are the fevers, burning hot, stealing strength, leaving men delirious, their minds drifting far from the muddy fields and into feverish dreams of home. The numbers become a haunting whisper in the camp. For every man felled by the sharp crack of a rifle, 2, 3, sometimes even 4 more succumb to the silent ravages of disease. It's a death that lacks the drama of a charge, the swift finality of a bullet. Instead, it is a slow, agonizing descent, a quiet fading away that is perhaps even more terrifying in its relentless inevitability. You become accustomed to the constant, cloying stench that hangs heavy in the air around the field hospitals, a sickening mix of bodily fluids, unwashed bodies, and the metallic tang of drying blood. It clings to everything, a pervasive odor that seeps into your very clothes, a constant reminder of the suffering that surrounds you. Inside these makeshift havens of horror, the conditions are beyond description. Unsterilized saws and scalpels glint dully in the dim, flickering light of lanterns. You hear the stories, the whispered accounts of the brave surgeons, working tirelessly, but often with tools and methods that only exacerbated the suffering. A broken bone, a shattered limb. These were not just injuries. They were often a death sentence. The most common, and perhaps most brutal, procedure was amputation. You hear the moans, the raw, primal screams of men undergoing these torturous operations. A sound that mixes with the relentless, rhythmic scrape of saw blades against bone. It is a sound that once heard can never truly be forgotten. A chilling symphony of pain that echoes through the camp. 60,000 amputations. The sheer scale of it is staggering. 60,000 men, their lives irrevocably altered, their bodies forever marked by the war. And even then, the struggle was far from over. 1 in 4 of those who survived the initial trauma of the amputation would succumb to infection, the unseen killer silently feasting on their ravaged flesh. You see the blackening limbs, the vacant eyes, the slow surrender to the rot that spreads from within. The air in these places is thick, not just with the smell of sickness, but with the palpable presence of despair. You breathe it in, the knowledge of your own vulnerability, the understanding that a simple cut, a scratch, even a minor illness could lead you down this same dark path. This quiet, pervasive threat is a constant companion, a silent shadow that follows you through every muddy march, every cold night, every shared meal. It is the insidious enemy that waits patiently, taking lives without the roar of cannon, leaving behind only the quiet, empty spaces where men once stood. The initial shock of the impact is almost a mercy, a sudden jolt that momentarily dulls the searing pain. You are hit, perhaps in the stomach, a gut-wrenching blow that steals your breath and sends you tumbling. The world spins, then settles into a blurry, distorted tableau of mud and sky. You lie there, your uniform rapidly soaking up the crimson tide that seeps from your wound. The warmth a chilling prelude to the cold that will soon follow. The noise of the battle, once deafening, begins to recede, replaced by a strange, muted hum. The immediate, instinctual fear that grips you is the fear of discovery, the fear of becoming a target for a final, decisive blow. Your mind screams a single, desperate instruction. Lie still. So you do. You play dead. Every muscle screams in protest. Every nerve ending is alight with agony. But you force your body into an unnatural stillness. Your eyes, half closed, scan the brutal landscape, trying to discern friend from foe, trying to assess the movements around you. The coppery taste of your own blood, mixing with the mud, is a constant, grim reminder of your predicament. You hear the heavy thud of boots nearby, the strained breathing of men, the distant cries of comrades, and your heart pounds a frantic rhythm against your ribs. You pray, silently, fervently, for an ambulance wagon, for the rattle of wheels, for the faint glimmer of hope that someone, anyone, will find you and carry you away from this desolate place. The minutes stretch into an eternity, each tick of your pulse a moment closer to rescue, or to the final, chilling stillness. If you are one of the fortunate few, a flask of whiskey might be pressed into your hand, its fiery liquid a brief, brutal comfort against the overwhelming pain. The burn as it goes down is almost welcome, a distraction from the agony in your gut. And for a short while, the edges of your torment might soften, blurred by the alcohol's numbing embrace. But for most, for the vast, silent majority, there is no such reprieve. They simply fall where they stood, or where they crawled, and there they remain. The rain, ceaseless and cold, begins to fall, soaking into their uniforms, chilling their bodies to the bone. It washes over the wounds, a futile cleansing, carrying away the blood, but not the life. As the hours crawl by, a new enemy arrives, one that feasts on the stillness of death and the helplessness of the wounded. Flies, drawn by the scent of blood and decay, begin to swarm. You hear their incessant buzzing around you. Feel their tiny, irritating legs crawling on your skin. A grim, buzzing herald of the end. They arrive long before any ambulance, a morbid escort. You lie there, cold, wet, in agony, the world slowly fading around you. The sounds of battle replaced by the hum of insects and the rhythmic drumming of rain. The quiet knowledge settles upon you, heavy and unavoidable, that this is where your journey ends. This is the unvarnished truth of the field, where the wounded are left, not to heroic rescue, but to the slow, quiet embrace of the earth and the indifference of the sky. The light in your eyes dims, the sounds fade, and the chilling realization becomes your final companion. You are alone, abandoned, and the flies are already here. The gnawing ache in your stomach becomes a constant companion, a dull, insistent hunger that never truly leaves. On paper, the rations distributed by the quartermaster look almost appealing, a promised bounty of salted pork and tough beef, perhaps even a few dried vegetables, the comforting warmth of coffee, and the sweet promise of sugar. These were the ideals, the provisions that fueled the marching man, the fighting spirit. But the reality, the harsh, unforgiving truth of the front lines, is a different story entirely. The actual food laid out before you is a sad parody of that generous list. More often than not, your daily sustenance consists of moldy cornbread, its once golden hue now marred by patches of green and gray. It crumbles in your hand, dry and tasteless, barely offering any sustenance. The coffee, if you're lucky enough to get it, is weak, a mere suggestion of its true potential, often brewed with water drawn from dubious sources, tasting faintly of earth and rust. And the tobacco, meant to offer a small measure of comfort, is damp and often clumpy, resisting your attempts to light it, leaving you with only the faint, bitter scent of what could have been. But hunger is a relentless master, and your body soon learns to disregard the visual and aromatic evidence of decay. You learn to pick off the larger, more visible bugs that infest your meager portions, an act performed with a grim, practiced detachment. The smaller ones are simply accepted, an unwelcome addition to a meal that offers little enough already. Every scrap becomes precious, every crumb a small victory against the constant emptiness. The instinct for survival becomes paramount, overriding all other considerations, even the strictures of military discipline. You become a master of foraging, eyes constantly scanning the landscape for anything that might offer a morsel of nourishment. A forgotten potato in a ravaged field, a wild berry bush, even the tender shoots of weeds, once dismissed as mere plants, now hold the promise of fleeting relief. The urge to steal, to liberate food from any source, becomes a powerful, almost uncontrollable impulse. A farmer's chicken coop, left unattended, becomes a treasure trove, and the risk of getting caught pales in comparison to the desperate need for protein. And then there are the whispered, clandestine trades. In the quiet lulls between skirmishes, under the cloak of night, a strange, unspoken truce sometimes forms between the lines. A shared humanity, perhaps, or simply a mutual understanding of a basic human need, bridges the chasm of war. You might exchange a precious pinch of your damp tobacco for a sip of the enemy's stronger coffee, a brief, silent transaction of basic comforts that transcends the conflict. These moments are fleeting, often dangerous, but they offer a glimpse of something beyond the constant struggle, a reminder that on the other side, there are men just as hungry, just as desperate. The food, when it comes, is often a bitter disappointment, a daily reminder of the hardship and deprivation that is your constant companion. Yet, you eat it, every last bite, because to not eat is to weaken. To weaken is to fall, and to fall here means a quiet, unnoticed end. The memory of a full meal, of a mother's cooking, becomes a distant, fading dream, replaced by the immediate, primal need to fill the aching void within. One moldy crumb, one watery sip at a time. This is the true sustenance of the war, not glory or ideals, but the grim, relentless feast of survival. Your musket, a 10-pound behemoth of wood and cold steel. becomes an extension of your very being, a constant, unyielding presence. It is your only true companion in the chaos, the silent arbiter of life and death, both yours and others. From the moment you pick it up, it begins to exact its toll. After a day of marching, of carrying its formidable weight across miles of uneven terrain, your arms ache with a deep, persistent throb. Your shoulder, where the stock repeatedly presses against you with each step, becomes a bruised, tender landscape, a testament to the constant friction and impact. Even after a few hours of firing, the sheer recoil, the jarring kick against your shoulder, sends tremors through your entire upper body, leaving you feeling battered and worn. The danger of this heavy, simple weapon is not just in its use against the enemy, but in its potential to turn against you. The barrel, after repeated firing, becomes dangerously hot, glowing with an internal heat that radiates outwards. You learn to handle it with extreme caution. The metallic tang of gunpowder clinging to your skin even hours after the last shot. The greatest fear is the premature ignition of powder within that overheated barrel. One slip, one moment of carelessness, and the very weapon you rely upon for survival could explode in your hands, tearing flesh and bone, ending your fight with a sudden, horrific blast of your own making. The weight suddenly becomes terrifying, a hot, ticking time bomb in your grasp. You develop a ritual, a deep, ingrained respect for its mechanisms. Each time you reload, ramming the powder and ball down the scorching barrel, a shiver of apprehension runs through you. You imagine the fiery flash, the searing pain, the immediate silence. This fear, though unspoken, is a shared burden, a silent understanding among every man who carries this weighty instrument of death. It adds another layer of tension to an already unbearable situation, turning the very tool of your defense into a potential instrument of your demise. Yet, despite its dangers and its relentless physical demands, the musket is indispensable. It is the only thing that stands between you and the enemy. But even these robust weapons have their limits. A sustained firefight, the relentless cycle of loading and firing, can render a musket unusable. A firing mechanism might jam. A barrel might become fouled beyond immediate repair, or a component might simply break under the strain. In these moments of desperation, amidst the screams and the smoke, you learn the grim efficiency of war. You glance around, your eyes darting over the fallen, over those whose fight has ended, and without a moment of hesitation, you reach. You swap your broken weapon for one still clutched in the cold, unyielding grip of a dead comrade. The exchange is swift, silent, almost mechanical. There is no time for sentiment, no room for reflection on the life that just ended. Only the urgent need to rearm yourself, to continue the fight. The new musket, still warm from the last hands that held it, still faintly smelling of gunpowder and something else, something metallic and sharp, becomes your own. You check its action, shoulder its familiar weight, and return to the fray, the cycle of violence continuing. The weight of the musket, now borrowed, pressing into your bruised arm, a constant, heavy reminder of the brutal cost of survival. Look around you, in the dim light of the campfire, or amidst the chaos of the charge. You see them, faces that are still too smooth, shoulders that haven't quite broadened, voices that crack with an uncertain adolescence. Hundreds of thousands of them. Boys who, just a few short months or years ago, were perhaps herding cattle or plowing fields, their lives circumscribed by the gentle rhythms of farm work. The vast majority of these young soldiers, many no older than 15, some barely 17, didn't enlist because of fervent political convictions or deep understanding of the grand ideological battles that raged between North and South. No, their motivations were far simpler, far more human. For many of them, just like you perhaps, the war represented an escape, a chance to break free from the monotonous, predictable cycle of farm life. The endless chores, the unchanging routine that stretched out before them like an uninspired future. The advertisements painted a romantic picture, a 90-day adventure, a grand escapade filled with excitement and camaraderie. A brief interlude before returning home, hailed as a hero. They envisioned glory, perhaps a bit of travel, the thrill of uniforms and marching bands. It was a call to something bigger, something more thrilling than dawn-to-dusk labor in the dirt. So, they answered the call, their hearts swelling with a mixture of youthful eagerness and a naive understanding of what lay ahead. They promised their mothers they'd be home soon, their fathers that they'd return as men. They strapped on their ill-fitting uniforms, picked up their heavy muskets, and stepped onto the path they believed would lead to a brief, glorious adventure. The reality, however, was a brutal, relentless betrayal of those innocent expectations. The 90-day adventure stretched into years of unrelenting, grinding war. The glamour faded quickly, replaced by the grim realities of constant marching through ankle-deep mud, the persistent gnaw of hunger, and the chilling, ever-present specter of disease and death. You see the light in their eyes dim, the youthful exuberance replaced by a haunted weariness that seems far too old for their years. The laughter, once boisterous and unrestrained, becomes quieter, more cynical. They learn to sleep in the rain, to eat food infested with bugs, to kill and to witness death with a disturbing familiarity. Their innocence is stripped away, not gradually, but in sudden, violent bursts. The boys who left home brimming with an almost childish enthusiasm return, if they return at all, as men forged in the crucible of unimaginable hardship, their youth stolen, their dreams replaced by the stark, indelible memories of the battlefield. You watch them, these young comrades, and you see fragments of your own naive beginnings, a silent testament to the lie that was sold, and the brutal truth that was bought with their youth and their lives. The eagerness to join the fight, to escape the mundane, was so potent that even the simple barrier of age became a challenge to be overcome with a youthful, almost playful ingenuity. There were no official identification papers, no birth certificates to verify age in those days, making the path to deception surprisingly simple for those determined enough to walk it. You heard the whispered stories, saw the quiet winks, understood the silent conspiracy that allowed so many underage boys to slip through the cracks and join the ranks. One of the oldest, simplest tricks involved a shoe sole. A boy, perhaps too short to stand eye to eye with the recruiting sergeant, would write the number 18, the legal age for enlistment, on a piece of paper and slip it into his boot, under his heel, or beneath the sole of his shoe. Then, when asked his age, he would confidently declare, "I am over 18." And technically, literally, he was. The recruiters, often desperate to fill their quotas, would sometimes turn a blind eye, accepting the thinly veiled deception, knowing that every young body was a potential soldier, another rifle to add to the line. Another common tactic involved a simple piece of paper tucked discreetly into a boot, again with the magic number 18 scrawled upon it. When asked, "How old are you?" "Son," the boy would simply reply. "Old enough to serve?" "Sir, some," or some similar vague answer, knowing that the proof lay hidden, technically present, if not precisely truthful in its direct application. It was a game, a gamble, played by boys desperate for adventure, unaware of the grim stakes. Sometimes, the deception went deeper, involving the very people who should have protected them from the horrors of war. You witnessed fathers, perhaps caught up in the patriotic fervor themselves, or driven by a desperate need for the enlistment bounty, vouching for their underage sons. With a solemn nod and a firm declaration of, "He's 18, all right," a father would effectively sign away his son's innocence, and sometimes his life, to the unforgiving maw of conflict. The recruiters, eager for numbers, would rarely question such a direct affirmation, especially from an adult who appeared to be a parent. These boys, barely on the cusp of manhood, were driven by a powerful yearning for a purpose, for an identity beyond their humble beginnings. They wanted to prove themselves, to be part of something larger, even if that something larger was a horrifying, bloody war they could not possibly comprehend. You see the glint of pride in their eyes when they finally don the uniform, a fleeting moment of triumph for having outsmarted the system. But as the days bleed into weeks, and weeks into months, that youthful bravado slowly erodes. The reality of constant drills, the bitter taste of meager rations, and the chilling presence of death around them begins to strip away their illusions. The 18 written on a shoe sole becomes a mocking reminder of a time when the war was just a game, a thrilling lie. And you watch as these boys, who so cleverly cheated their way into the ranks, are tragically, brutally transformed into men, or into memories. In the grand tapestry of this brutal conflict, there is another story, one woven with threads of deep injustice and unyielding courage. It is the story of the black soldier, a man fighting not only for the Union, but for his very humanity, for the respect and dignity so long denied. You witness their determined arrival in the ranks of the Union Army, a presence that began to grow steadily from 1862 and then surged with powerful force after the Emancipation Proclamation in January of 1863. Before this, they were often relegated to support roles, but now they carried muskets, wore the blue uniform, and stood shoulder to shoulder, at least in theory, with their white counterparts. Their fight was a dual one. On the battlefield, they faced the same dangers, the same screaming bullets, the same crushing reality of death as any other soldier. But off the battlefield, in the camps and behind the lines, they waged a silent, persistent war against systemic prejudice. Despite performing the same duties, facing the same risks, and demonstrating the same bravery, black soldiers were paid significantly less than white soldiers. It was an insult, a blatant disregard for their contributions, a stark reminder that even in the fight for freedom, the chains of inequality still clung tight. You could see the quiet resentment, the weary determination in their eyes. They understood the injustice, but they also understood the monumental importance of their presence, the symbolism of their fight. Their very existence in uniform was a powerful statement, a challenge to the deeply entrenched racist beliefs that underpinned much of the conflict. The Confederate side, trapped in its dying ideology, held fast to its reliance on slavery for as long as possible. The very notion of arming enslaved people, or even free black men, was anathema to the foundations of their cause. Only in the final, desperate, gasping weeks of the war, when their resources were utterly depleted and their ranks decimated, did the Confederacy reluctantly, and with immense internal resistance, even consider allowing black enlistment. Even then, it was a hollow promise, a last-ditch effort born of necessity, not principle. There was no promise of freedom for those who served, no guarantee of liberty for their families. It was a cynical plea for survival, utterly devoid of the emancipatory ideals that slowly, grudgingly, began to drive the Union's cause. You observe the stark contrast. On one side, a nascent, imperfect recognition of black agency and the beginning of a long, arduous journey toward equality. On the other, a stubborn, self-destructive refusal to acknowledge basic human rights until the very end. The presence of the black soldier in the Union Army was a powerful, undeniable force. Their quiet resolve, their unwavering commitment, despite the rampant discrimination, spoke volumes. They marched with a dignity that transcended their meager pay, fought with a ferocity born of a deeper purpose. They were not just fighting for a union, they were fighting for themselves, for their families, for a future where their skin color would not dictate their worth or their freedom. Their story is a testament to resilience, a quiet, profound act of courage that reverberates through the grim history of these long, bloody years. Beyond the terrifying bursts of battle, the war unfolds in long, monotonous stretches, a relentless cycle of repetition and discipline. These non-combat days, which make up the vast majority of your time as a soldier, are filled with the ceaseless grind of drills, day after day, under the indifferent gaze of the sun or the biting chill of the wind. You are put through the paces, marching back and forth across fields, performing the same movements, the same maneuvers, until your muscles ache with a dull, persistent pain. Guard duty, a cold and often lonely vigil, becomes a familiar companion. Hours stretch into an eternity as you stand watch, eyes scanning the darkness, listening to the murmurs of the camp, the distant sounds of nature, or the unsettling quiet that sometimes falls over the land. The crisp, clean snap of a flag in the wind, the distant hoot of an owl, the shifting weight of your musket against your shoulder. These are the subtle rhythms of your nights. And then there is the constant, almost ritualistic task of cleaning your weapon. Every day, the musket must be meticulously cleaned, its barrel scoured, its firing mechanism oiled. The black powder residue, corrosive and pervasive, demands constant attention, a never-ending battle against rust and malfunction. You learn to strip it down with practiced ease, your fingers moving with an automatic precision born of countless repetitions. The metallic scent of gun oil, a familiar comfort. In the early days of the war, before the relentless lessons of battle imposed a grim uniformity, the drilling was often a chaotic spectacle. Regiments, new and untested, would move out of sync, their movements clashing, their lines wavering like a drunkard's walk. The brass bands, meant to inspire and coordinate, would play different tunes, their music clashing in a cacophony of cheerful, yet utterly uncoordinated sound. It was a clumsy, awkward dance, a testament to the raw, green nature of the armies that first took the field. Columns of men, ill-trained and uncertain, would trudge through the mud, their boots sinking with each step, their progress slow and arduous. The very ground seemed to conspire against them, turning every march into a Sisyphean struggle. But slowly, painfully, under the relentless pressure of command and the grim reality of combat, a rough semblance of order began to emerge. The movements became more precise, the lines a little straighter, the coordination a little tighter. The drills, once a source of clumsy frustration, began to instill a deeper, almost instinctual understanding of collective movement. You learned to anticipate the commands, to respond with automaticity, to become a small, interchangeable part of a larger, more formidable machine. This endless, repetitive grind, though tiresome and often mind-numbingly dull, was the forge in which a disparate collection of individuals was slowly, inexorably, hammered into a coherent fighting force. It was the rhythm of your days, the beat to which your life in the army marched, a constant, pervasive reminder that even in the quiet moments between battles, the war was always present, shaping you, refining you, stripping away everything that was not essential to your survival. In the long, slow quiet that often settles over the camp after a day of drills, or during the lulls between battles, a different kind of hunger emerges, a hunger not for food, but for connection, for words from another world. You find yourself drawn to any scrap of printed material, a tattered newspaper, a forgotten book, even a discarded letter. Each word is a precious commodity, a window into a life beyond the constant mud. The pervasive stench of sweat and smoke, and the ever-present shadow of death. You read slowly, savoring each phrase, letting your mind wander beyond the confines of your immediate reality. But the most vital connection, the most cherished lifeline, is the one you forge with your pen. Writing home becomes a sacred ritual, an act performed whenever paper and ink can be found, whenever a moment of peace allows for coherent thought. You pour your heart onto the page, attempting to bridge the impossible distance between your brutal reality and the gentle, imagined peace of home. These letters are often a strange, heartbreaking blend of emotions and experiences. On one hand, there is the overwhelming sense of gratitude, the profound relief of survival. You thank God, sometimes with tears in your eyes, for sparing you, for allowing you to see another dawn, another sunset. You speak of hope, of longing for the day you will return, for the warmth of a familiar embrace. But then, the raw, unvarnished truth of the war begins to seep onto the page, staining the quiet hopes with the harshness of your daily existence. You find yourself recounting, sometimes in graphic detail, the horrors you have witnessed, the memory of a comrade falling beside you, his life extinguished in a sudden, violent gasp, the cries of the wounded, the sight of bodies sprawled in the mud, the overwhelming, sickening smell of death. You struggle to find the words, to convey the sheer, unimaginable scale of suffering and loss, without shattering the fragile peace of those who wait for you back home. How do you explain the unexplainable? How do you make the civilian world, a world of sunlit parlors and green fields, understand the constant, gnawing fear, the dehumanizing conditions, the profound sense of loss that has become your daily bread? You try to describe the cold, the hunger, the pervasive dampness, the endless marching, the dull ache in your bones, but the words feel inadequate, thin and insubstantial compared to the crushing weight of the experience itself. You fear that by telling the whole truth, you might frighten them too much, or worse. that they simply won't be able to grasp the magnitude of what you've endured. And so, the letters become a delicate balance, a tightrope walk between reassurance and reality. You choose your words carefully, knowing that each sentence will be dissected, each phrase worried over by anxious eyes. The hope is that through these fragile, ink-stained bridges, a glimmer of understanding might pass, a shared sense of the sacrifice being made. But deep down, you know that the true reality of the war, the full weight of its horror and its quiet devastation, will forever remain beyond the grasp of those who have not breathed its smoke or tasted its bitter dust. And so, you seal the letter, a silent prayer for its safe journey, knowing that its true meaning will always be a whisper, just a faint echo from the edge of an unfathomable abyss. The Great War, a conflict that swallowed nations and churned landscapes into unimaginable hellscapes. Millions were thrown into a meat grinder of industrial-scale warfare. But among the roaring artillery, the rattling machine guns, and the terrifying gas attacks, there was a quieter, more insidious threat: the sniper. Imagine living, day in and day out, in a muddy ditch barely wider than a hallway. Your world is this trench, above you, a narrow strip of sky, and the constant, gnawing fear of exposing yourself. For 4 long years, soldiers across Europe were trapped in these linear scars on the earth. The objective: hold your line, push forward when ordered, survive the relentless barrages. In this static, grinding conflict, the value of observation became paramount. Knowing what the enemy was doing, where their lines were weakest, where their snipers were positioned. But gaining that observation came at an incredibly high price. Lifting your head over the parapet, even for a second, was like flipping a coin with death. Sniper technology in World War I wasn't what we think of today. Scopes were less advanced, rifles varied, but the skill was ancient. The ability to wait, to blend in, to spot a target at hundreds of yards, sometimes even 1,000 yards or more, and land a shot precisely where intended. A skilled sniper could paralyze a section of trench, making movement impossible, disrupting resupply, or simply picking off officers and key personnel. The psychological impact was immense. You couldn't relax. You couldn't stand upright for long. Even eating or sleeping was done with the understanding that somewhere out there, someone might be watching. The feeling of being hunted was constant. It wasn't just about the physical danger. It was about the erosion of morale. The relentless pressure that wore men down faster than the cold or the hunger. Standard issue periscopes offered some protection, allowing soldiers to see over the top without exposing their heads. But they were bulky, could be easily spotted, and offered a limited field of vision. Snipers learned to spot the glint of the periscope lens, or the slight movement as it was raised. They became targets themselves. Relying solely on a periscope wasn't always enough, or even possible in every situation. A headshot was devastating. The skull is a small target, but a vital one. A bullet hitting the head usually resulted in instant death or horrific, unsurvivable injury. There was no million-dollar wound here, no clean shot through the arm or leg that got you sent home. A headshot was the end of the line, and snipers, highly trained and utterly merciless, specialized in making those shots. Soldiers became hyper-aware of their own silhouettes. The curve of a helmet against the skyline, the shadow cast by a raised shoulder, the briefest flash of skin or fabric. These were the giveaways. In a war measured in feet and inches gained or lost. Survival often came down to mere fractions of an inch of exposure. The pressure to stay low, to move only when absolutely necessary, became ingrained. The trenches, while offering protection from shell fire and direct assault, became traps in another way. They funneled movement. They dictated posture. They made the act of simply looking out onto the battlefield a potentially fatal decision. And it was in this environment of extreme vulnerability and constant surveillance that a desperate need arose for a way to observe the enemy, without offering your own head as a target. The problem was clear: how do you see without being seen, when merely existing above ground level is an invitation to death? The solution, when it arrived, was surprisingly simple, utterly ingenious, and frankly, a little bit ridiculous looking. But it worked. And in the brutal calculus of war, that's all that mattered. It needed to trick a highly skilled, highly focused killer into giving away his position, or wasting his shot, on something that wasn't a living, breathing man. It needed to be a decoy. And the first, most effective decoy of this new era of static warfare was about to take shape. Necessity, as they say, is the mother of invention. And in the nightmarish stalemate of the trenches, necessity was a demanding parent. Soldiers and officers alike were constantly thinking, adapting, trying to find small advantages that could tilt the terrifying odds just a fraction. The constant threat of the sniper was a problem that cried out for a creative solution. While various periscope designs existed, they were often bulky, fragile, and quickly identified by experienced snipers. What was needed was something that looked real from a distance, but wasn't. Something that could draw fire, revealing a sniper's position without sacrificing a life. The initial idea wasn't sophisticated. It was born from a simple observation: snipers were looking for heads. The challenge was creating something lightweight, relatively durable, easy to produce quickly, and convincing enough to fool a trained eye operating sometimes hundreds of yards away. Steel was too heavy, too expensive, and didn't react like flesh or cloth when hit. Wood might splinter too obviously. What material was cheap, easy to mold, and could be made to approximate texture and form? The answer, perhaps surprisingly, came from the world of arts and crafts, not military engineering. Papier-mâché, paper and glue, a simple technique used for centuries to create everything from decorative objects to theatrical props. Could this humble material, usually associated with masks and models, find a deadly new purpose on the battlefield? The exact origins are a bit hazy, lost to the chaos and decentralized innovation of the war. But reports and examples began to surface relatively early in the conflict, particularly from the British and French lines. The concept was straightforward: build a hollow form roughly the shape and size of a human head. Cover it with layers of paper strips soaked in glue or paste. Let it dry. Then paint and finish it to look like a soldier's head, complete with helmet. The structure needed to be mounted on a stick or pole, allowing a soldier to raise it from the relative safety of the trench floor, above the parapet. This allowed them to simulate the brief exposure a real soldier might make while peeking out, or the appearance of someone standing lookout. The key was making the movement look natural, or at least plausible, from a distance. The beauty of papier-mâché was its accessibility. Paper was plentiful, and basic glue or paste could be made from flour and water. Soldiers themselves, or support personnel behind the lines, could potentially fabricate these decoys with minimal training and equipment. They weren't high-tech marvels. They were folk art pressed into military service. This allowed for rapid, widespread adoption across different units and sectors of the front. While some might have been crude, thrown together in the trenches, more effective versions were likely produced in dedicated workshops. These workshops could refine the process, use better materials for realism, and ensure a more consistent product. The goal wasn't perfect realism up close. That wasn't necessary. It was realism at a distance, under battlefield conditions, often observed through the distorted view of an early rifle scope or binoculars. The challenge lay in the details. How to paint it convincingly. What color should the skin be? How to represent hair or stubble? How to make the eyes look like they were seeing? These weren't abstract sculptures. They were meant to impersonate life. Early designs were likely simple, perhaps just a painted sphere under a fake helmet. But they quickly evolved as soldiers and manufacturers learned what worked and what didn't. The very idea must have seemed slightly absurd at first. Fighting a deadly sniper with a paper head on a stick. But the logic was undeniable. If it looked enough like a man's head, a sniper's instinct would be to shoot. And if they shot, they revealed themselves. And a revealed sniper, even if only for a moment, was a vulnerable sniper. This wasn't just about baiting snipers. It was about gathering vital intelligence. By observing where the shots came from, counter-snipers could be directed, or artillery fire called in. A simple dummy head could initiate a chain of events that led to the neutralization of a dangerous enemy position, all without risking a single life during the initial provocation. And so, from the grim necessity of trench warfare, the papier-mâché dummy head was born. A low-tech, almost comical-looking invention, yet one that embodied the desperate ingenuity required for survival. It was proof that sometimes the most effective tools in a technologically escalating war weren't forged in steel mills or chemical labs, but sculpted from paper and paste. A testament to the human will to deceive death itself. The next challenge, making these deceptive heads convincing enough to fool trained killers. To appreciate the effectiveness of the dummy head, you have to understand the craft involved. These weren't mass-produced toys. They were tools of war, built with surprising attention to detail, considering the brutal environment they were destined for. The goal was not perfect artistic realism, but functional battlefield illusion. The core material was, as we've seen, papier-mâché. This involved tearing or cutting paper into strips or small pieces, soaking them in a mixture of water and glue or starch-based paste, and then layering them over a form. The form could be simple, a wooden block, a shaped piece of wire mesh, or even sculpted clay that was later removed. Multiple layers were applied, building up thickness and strength. Once dry, the resulting shell was surprisingly hard and lightweight. The shape was crucial. It needed to mimic the size and contour of a human head. They often included a neck portion, allowing it to be mounted more realistically on a pole. Some even incorporated a bit of a shoulder line to enhance the illusion when viewed from specific angles. Proportions didn't have to be perfect, but they had to be roughly correct from a distance. Painting was where the illusion truly came to life. A base coat of a flesh-like tone was applied, varying from pale to ruddy, depending on the intended look. Then came the crucial details. Eyes were particularly important. Sometimes, small glass eyes were used, similar to those found in dolls or taxidermy. More often, they were simply painted on. The key was to give the impression of eyes looking forward, perhaps slightly upwards, as a soldier might when peering over a trench. Even a simple painted dot could be effective at range. Hair was often represented with paint or texture. But some heads went further. Actual hair, or horsehair, or even frayed rope, was sometimes glued onto the scalp area to simulate a soldier's hairstyle peeking out beneath the helmet. Meticulously painted stubble or eyebrows added another layer of detail. The goal was to create visual cues that a sniper's brain would automatically interpret as human head. Of course, the heads were rarely presented bare. They were almost always fitted with a standard issue helmet appropriate to the army they were supposed to represent. These could be actual damaged helmets, or perhaps simplified papier-mâché versions themselves. The helmet helped conceal some of the cruder aspects of the head underneath and added immediate recognition as a soldier. Some examples showed an incredible level of detail. Painted on sweat droplets, streaks of mud, even simulated injuries or bandages. One famous example, now housed in the Imperial War Museum in London, is attributed to a British soldier, Lance Corporal W. H. Cox of the Royal Engineers. His heads were reportedly so convincing, he even gave them names like Bill and Charlie. This suggests not only a dedication to the craft, but perhaps a coping mechanism, a dark humor applied to a deadly serious business. Naming them gave them a perverse sort of personality, making their sacrifice perhaps more palpable, or simply reflecting the soldier's connection to the object that might save his life. The method of deployment was part of the craft too. The pole needed to be sturdy, but not too heavy. It had to allow for controlled movement, a slow rise, a slight tilt, holding still, then a slow withdrawal, jerky. Unnatural movement would immediately betray the ruse. The pole was usually attached to the base of the neck or through the bottom of the head, allowing the soldier operating it to stay completely hidden below the trench line. When a dummy head took a hit, the result was very different from a real casualty. Instead of blood and collapse, there was a distinct sound, a dull thud or a sharp crack as the projectile tore through the dried paper and wood. The head might jolt violently, or a piece might splinter off. Observing this reaction from a distance was often the first clue to the sniper that something was wrong. But by then, they had fired and potentially revealed their position. Soldiers using these decoys would often study the damage. A bullet hole confirmed it had drawn fire. The angle of entry could even provide clues about the sniper's approximate position. These damaged heads weren't just casualties. They were pieces of intelligence, silent witnesses to the enemy's deadly presence. The effectiveness of the dummy head wasn't just about how real it looked, but how it was used. A beautifully crafted head used poorly was useless. A crude head used with skill and timing could be a lifesaver. The craft, therefore, extended beyond the physical object to the operational art of deception. But the object itself, painstakingly assembled from humble materials, represented a profound psychological weapon. It wasn't just mimicking a soldier. It was designed to exploit the very instincts and training of the enemy sniper. The dummy head wasn't just an object. It was a performer on the most dangerous stage imaginable. No man's land. Its performance, however brief, could mean the difference between life and death for the soldiers using it. Deploying and operating these decoys required patience, careful timing, and a keen understanding of the sniper's craft. The standard method involved extending the head just above the trench parapet, mimicking a soldier cautiously peeking over. This was often done from a specific, reinforced lookout point in the trench line. The soldier operating the decoy would be positioned safely below, controlling the pole. The movement had to be slow and deliberate, not sudden or jerky, which would look unnatural. They would raise the head slowly, maybe hold it still for a few moments, simulating a soldier observing the landscape. Then, perhaps, a slight tilt, a subtle shift in height, before slowly lowering it back down. This mimicked the natural movements of a human head scanning an area. The duration of exposure was critical, too long, and a skilled sniper might detect the artifice. Too short, and it might not attract attention at all. From the sniper's point of view, they are scanning kilometers of enemy lines, looking for the smallest sign of life. A glint, a movement, a shape that doesn't belong. When the dummy head appears, it registers as a potential target. The brain processes the shape, the context it's appearing, where a head should be, and the instinct to acquire the target takes over. The sniper's training kicks in. Identify target, estimate range, adjust scope if necessary, control breathing, squeeze the trigger. The shot rings out. The bullet flies. It hits the dummy head. That moment, the instant of impact, was the critical payoff for the soldiers using the decoy. They heard the shot. They saw the reaction of the head. They noted the direction the shot came from. This wasn't just about making the sniper waste a bullet. It was about pinpointing their location. A trained spotter or observer, often equipped with better binoculars or a more advanced periscope, would be watching the area from which the shot originated. A puff of smoke more common with early black powder, though less so with smokeless powder becoming standard. The glint of a scope, the faint outline of a camouflaged position, or simply triangulating based on the sound. Any of these could help locate the sniper. Once the sniper's position was identified, countermeasures could be deployed. This might involve directing friendly snipers to engage the enemy position, calling in artillery or mortar fire on the suspected location, or preparing for a trench raid to neutralize the threat directly. The dummy head, silent and inanimate, had done its job as bait and reconnaissance tool. This tactical use wasn't always about immediate counter-fire. Sometimes, the dummy head was used simply to keep the snipers honest, to remind them that the enemy was actively trying to locate them, discouraging them from staying in one position for too long or becoming too comfortable. It added another layer of stress to the sniper's already high-pressure job. The effectiveness varied. Of course, highly experienced snipers might learn to distinguish between real and fake heads, especially with repeated use in the same area. Factors like light conditions, distance, and the quality of the dummy head all played a role. But the simple fact that the tactic existed and was used frequently meant snipers could never be entirely certain what they were shooting at until after they fired. The puppet war, as it was sometimes grimly called, turned sections of the front into a deadly game of observation and deception. The dummy heads were the puppets, dangled to draw out the enemy's fire. The first side to shoot at a fake target or to reveal their position while trying to identify if a target was real risked losing the exchange. It wasn't just a test of marksmanship. It was a test of nerve and judgment. Soldiers became adept at using these simple tools. They learned the nuances of movement, the best times of day to deploy them, often dawn or dusk, when light was tricky, and how to position them to make them look as natural as possible. Some units even developed specific drills for dummy head deployment and observation. The casualty rate for dummy heads was, of course, 100% of those that successfully drew fire. They were expendable. Their purpose was to be shot at, and each bullet hole represented a potential bullet that didn't hit a real soldier. In the grim accounting of trench warfare, where every life was precious and survival was a constant battle against the odds. A cheap papier-mâché head that took a bullet was an unqualified success. It embodied the fundamental principle of survival. In the trenches, make the enemy target something else. Anything else. To understand the true genius of the dummy head, you need to step inside the mind of the man it was designed to deceive the sniper. A sniper's job is one of extreme concentration, patience, and lethal precision. They are hunters, operating often alone or in small teams, relying on stealth, observation, and the ability to make a single shot count. A sniper doesn't just shoot at random targets. They select high-value individuals, officers, machine gunners, radio operators, or simply anyone who exposes themselves foolishly. They wait for the opportune moment, assessing distance, wind, angle. Their trigger finger is disciplined. They fire only when they have a high probability of a kill. Firing and missing isn't just a wasted bullet. It's a risk. It gives away their position, potentially drawing deadly counterfire. Snipers are trained to look for specific cues: shape, movement, color contrasts, the outline of a helmet, the vertical line of a body standing up, the movement of a head turning. These are the things that stand out against the background clutter of the battlefield. And the most compelling target, the ultimate prize, is often the head. So, when a shape that looks exactly like a soldier's head appears above the enemy trench line, it triggers an immediate reaction in the sniper's brain. Target acquisition, all the training, all the focus, locks onto that shape. It looks right. It's in the right place. And it might be moving just enough to seem real. But here's where the dummy head introduced a devastating psychological weapon doubt. The sniper prepares to fire. They squeeze the trigger. The bullet hits. And then, nothing happens as expected. The target doesn't fall, doesn't react like flesh and bone. It just jolts, or a piece flies off. What was that? Did I hit it? It looked like I hit it. Why isn't it down? Was it not a man? Was it a trick? These questions flood the sniper's mind in the seconds after the shot. The certainty they rely on is shattered. This uncertainty creates hesitation. Now, every time the sniper sees any potential target emerge from the trench, that doubt lingers. Is it real? Or is it another dummy? The natural automatic reaction to fire is replaced by a moment of hesitation, a need for further observation, a second look. And in the world of sniping, hesitation can be fatal. While the sniper is agonizing over the authenticity of the dummy, a real soldier might expose themselves elsewhere along the line for a split second. An opportunity missed. Or worse, the sniper's prolonged focus on the decoy's position might make them vulnerable to counter-sniping or observation from another part of the enemy line. The dummy head didn't just waste a bullet. It occupied the sniper's attention and injected psychological poison into their decision cycle. It forced them to question their own judgment, their own eyes. For a profession that demands absolute confidence and clarity of thought, this enforced doubt was debilitating. It could make them hesitant to shoot at real targets, or conversely, trigger-happy and more likely to waste shots on future decoys, further revealing their position. The very existence of the dummy head tactic meant that every potential head-shaped target had to be treated with suspicion. Snipers would have to observe longer. Look for secondary cues. Was there any other movement, any sound? Did the head appear exactly the same way every time? This increased observation time also increased their own risk of being spotted. It turned the deadly game of sniping into a battle of wills. a psychological chess match. The soldiers in the trenches were using the sniper's own predatory instincts against them. They knew the sniper wanted to shoot. They offered them a tempting, seemingly easy target, daring them to commit. If the sniper succumbed to the bait, they lost the psychological advantage. Accounts from the time, both Allied and German, speak to the prevalence and effectiveness of these decoys. Snipers grew wary. Soldiers learned to rely on their inanimate stand-ins. The simple, low-tech dummy head had become a powerful psychological weapon, capable not just of saving a life, but of disrupting the enemy's deadliest marksmen by eroding their confidence and planting the seeds of paralyzing doubt. It proved that in war, the mind could be as critical a target as the body. The use of dummy heads elevated trench warfare beyond simple brute force into a nuanced, often deadly game of deception. It wasn't just passive defense. It was active baiting. Soldiers weren't just hiding. They were laying traps, using fake faces to lure out the enemy's hidden killers. This became known, informally and perhaps darkly, as the puppet war. The strategy was simple: present a convincing target, wait for the sniper to fire, and then use the sound and flash of the shot to locate them. But the execution required finesse. It was a test of patience for both sides. The soldier operating the dummy had to wait, sometimes for hours, presenting the decoy intermittently. The sniper had to observe, discriminate, and decide when and if to shoot. Skilled operators would practice making the dummy heads move realistically. A head that popped up too fast, stayed too still for too long, or moved in an unnatural way would be less likely to fool an experienced sniper. They tried to mimic the hesitant, cautious movements of a real soldier peering over the parapet. A quick glance, a moment of observation, a rapid duck back down. Locating the sniper wasn't always easy. Sound detection technology was primitive. Visual confirmation of a muzzle flash could be obscured by smoke, dust, or camouflage. Triangulation using the sound required multiple observers. But even an approximate location was better than nothing. It narrowed down the search area for counter-snipers or artillery spotters. Once a sniper's general area was identified, friendly snipers could be deployed to try and locate and neutralize them. This turned into deadly duels, the enemy sniper trying to remain hidden, the friendly sniper trying to find the telltale sign of their position. The dummy head initiated this process, often taking the first bullet so a real counter-sniper didn't have to. Beyond counter-sniping, pinpointing an enemy sniper's position could lead to calling in artillery or mortar fire. While less precise than a sniper duel, a well-aimed barrage could make the sniper's position untenable, forcing them to move or risk being killed by shell fragments. This was a high-stakes use of the dummy head, trading a few pounds of papier-mâché for a potentially effective strike on an enemy strongpoint. The information gathered wasn't just about individual snipers. Repeated shots from the same area, or a cluster of identified sniper positions, could reveal patterns in the enemy's deployment, indicating reinforced sectors, key observation points, or potential areas for future attacks. The dummy heads became silent informants, their bullet wounds mapping the enemy's hidden threats. This puppet war wasn't without its risks for the soldiers using the decoys. Raising the pole itself, even from below the parapet, could momentarily expose an arm or shoulder. A nervous or inexperienced soldier might make a mistake. And if the sniper did discern it was a dummy, but hadn't given away their position, they might simply wait for the real soldier to expose themselves later, knowing they were there. It required discipline and a steady hand. The dummy heads weren't just tools. They became symbols. Symbols of ingenuity, of the grim humor required to survive, and of the value placed on human life even in the face of industrial-scale death. A head that took a bullet was cheered, its sacrifice acknowledged. It was a small victory in a war defined by immense loss. Some historians argue that the dummy head, while seemingly crude, was a perfect example of adapting existing skills and materials to meet an urgent battlefield need. It leveraged artistic ability, basic crafting skills, and an understanding of human perception and psychology. It was analog deception in a world rapidly moving towards mechanized warfare. While most associated with the static trench warfare of World War I, the principle of using decoys to draw fire and reveal enemy positions was timeless. The lessons learned in the mud and barbed wire about deceiving the watchful eye of the sniper would carry forward into future conflicts, adapting to new environments and new technologies. The puppet war of the Western Front proved the enduring value of cunning and misdirection on the battlefield. The era of the papier-mâché head might be ending with the war, but the concept it embodied was here to stay. World War I ended, but warfare did not. Decades passed, technologies advanced, and the battlefields transformed. The mud and wire of the Western Front gave way to the deserts of North Africa, the forests of Europe, the islands of the Pacific, and later, the suffocating heat and dense foliage of the Vietnamese jungle. Yet, the problem of the hidden marksman, the sniper, persisted. And so too did the need for decoys. By the Vietnam War, sniper tactics had become even more refined. Rifles were more accurate, scopes were better, and camouflage techniques had advanced significantly. The Viet Cong and North Vietnamese army became masters of concealment in the dense jungle environment. Ambushes were common, and the threat of being picked off by a hidden sniper was a constant danger for American and Allied troops. The environment in Vietnam was vastly different from the trenches. Visibility was often limited to just a few yards. Movement was slow and arduous. There were no clear trench lines stretching for miles. Instead, the battlefield was a three-dimensional maze of trees, vines, and undergrowth, offering countless hiding places. How could a tactic developed for wide-open, static lines possibly apply here? The principle remained the same: you needed to draw the sniper's fire to locate them, without risking a life. While complex technological solutions were being developed, the simple, low-tech decoy still held value, especially in environments where high-tech gear could be cumbersome, unreliable, or difficult to maintain. Dummy heads, or similar human-shaped decoys, continued to be used, though perhaps less systematically than in WWI. Instead of being raised from a trench, they might be placed in a likely sniper position, tied to a tree trunk, or positioned near a patrol route. The materials might change, perhaps rubber, plastic, or even local materials molded to shape, rather than papier-mâché, which would suffer in the humidity and rain. Using decoys in the jungle presented new challenges. Locating the sniper after they fired was harder. The dense foliage could absorb sound, obscure the view, and make it difficult to pinpoint the origin of a shot. Muzzle flashes were harder to see in daylight or through the trees. Counter-fire or calling in support was also more complicated in the close-quarters jungle environment. Viet Cong and NVA snipers were renowned for their patience and camouflage skills. They would blend seamlessly into the environment, waiting for hours for a single shot. Tricking them required decoys that were not only visually convincing, but also deployed in a way that seemed natural for the environment, positioned where a soldier might legitimately be resting, observing, or moving. The use of decoys in Vietnam was likely more opportunistic and localized compared to the large-scale production and deployment seen in WWE. Individual units or soldiers might improvise decoys based on available materials. The high rate of patrol and ambush meant that having a quick, deployable decoy could be invaluable in a sudden contact situation. While technology in Vietnam was far more advanced than in WWE, with helicopters, sophisticated communication, and advanced weaponry, the fundamental cat-and-mouse game between infantry and snipers remained. And the simple, effective concept of making something else take the bullet continued to be relevant. A piece of painted rubber or plastic, shaped like a head and placed strategically, could still draw that revealing shot. The Vietnam War demonstrated that the principle behind the dummy head transcended the specific environment of the trenches. The core idea, deception as a means of protection and intelligence gathering against a hidden threat, was adaptable. While the iconic papier-mâché head of WWE might seem like a relic, its spirit lived on in various forms of battlefield deception used in different conflicts, paving the way for even more sophisticated decoys in the future. The goal was always the same: make the enemy shoot at a ghost. From the muddy trenches of World War I and the dense jungles of Vietnam, the art of military deception has evolved dramatically. Today's battlefield is a complex landscape of interconnected systems, electronic signals, thermal signatures, and sophisticated surveillance. Snipers are still a threat, but they operate within a far more technologically advanced ecosystem, and the decoys used to fool the enemy have changed accordingly. Modern military decoys are designed to fool a wide range of enemy sensors, not just the human eye and rifle scope. We now have thermal decoys, designed to mimic the heat signature of a vehicle or human, fooling infrared cameras and thermal sights. These can be as simple as strategically placed heaters or as complex as specially designed panels that emit realistic heat patterns. Inflatable decoys are another common tool. Giant, lightweight balloons shaped like tanks, trucks, or even aircraft can be rapidly deployed to create the illusion of a large military force. From aerial reconnaissance, these decoys can look incredibly convincing, drawing enemy airstrikes or artillery fire onto empty ground, protecting real assets. They are the spiritual successors to the WWE dummy head, scaled up to deceive not just a sniper, but entire intelligence apparatuses. The battlefield isn't just physical, it's electronic. Modern decoys include electronic countermeasures designed to mimic radar signatures, create fake radio traffic, or spoof GPS signals. These decoys operate in the invisible spectrum, confusing enemy targeting systems, overwhelming their sensors, or making them misjudge the location and strength of forces. A modern dummy might not have a head, but it projects a false signal that looks like a fully operational tank or command post to enemy sensors. Unmanned systems themselves can sometimes function as decoys, drawing fire or attention away from manned units. A reconnaissance drone hovering in an area might tempt enemy air defenses to reveal their position. A ground robot moving forward might draw small arms fire, revealing hidden infantry. Even traditional physical decoys, like human-shaped targets or silhouettes, are still used, particularly for training snipers and observers. And the principle of creating convincing, yet fake, visual cues remains relevant in certain situations, especially against less technologically advanced adversaries or in close-quarters combat. Think back to the papier-mâché head on a stick. Its genius lay in exploiting a fundamental human vulnerability, the reliance on visual cues and the instinctual reaction to a perceived threat. Modern decoys operate on the same principle, but they exploit the vulnerabilities of electronic sensors and automated systems. They are designed to trigger a response, a thermal lock, a radar lock, an intelligence assessment based on false information. The evolution from a painted paper head to a heat-emitting inflatable tank or a complex electronic signal generator is staggering. But the core idea is unchanged. Create a convincing illusion to draw the enemy's attention and resources away from your real assets, to reveal their position, or to simply waste their time and ammunition. It's about fighting smart, not just hard. It's about deception as a force multiplier. What the story of the dummy head and its modern descendants reveals is a fundamental truth about survival in war. Whether it's a brutal war of inches in a trench or a high-tech conflict fought across continents, survival often depends on knowing when to let something else take the hit. It's about understanding your enemy's perceptions and systems and presenting them with a target that isn't you. In the end, the humble papier-mâché dummy head of World War I was more than just a clever trick. It was a symbol of human ingenuity in the face of overwhelming danger. It was a testament to the fact that sometimes the most effective weapon isn't the one that inflicts the most damage, but the one that saves the most lives by simply being there, taking the hit, and letting the real soldier live to fight another day. The battle against the unseen threat continues, fought not just with bullets and bombs, but with illusions and lies. And the legacy of the head that took a bullet and smiled lives on in every fake signal, every inflatable tank, every thermal ghost that haunts the modern battlefield.